Alright everybody, welcome to the channel, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. Really appreciate it, hope you like what you see. If you do, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me. And for everybody, if you guys like the video, make sure you hit that like button and leave me a bunch of comments. The more likes I get, the more comments I get, the more YouTube likes it and the more they share the video, which in turn helps my channel grow, as you guys probably are aware of. So my channel is growing pretty well right now, and I really want to thank each and every one of you. So thank you so much for the support you guys have been showing me lately. Really do appreciate it. Alright, what we got going on today is we have a classic encounter from 1890. Yeah, from 1890 in Oregon, close to Brookings, Oregon, on the Chetco River. Now this is a hair-raising story about a logging operation that ran into a Sasquatch, and they did the Sasquatch wrong, so he turned around and showed them who was boss. Wait until you guys hear about this story. It's a really interesting story. One thing about this though, they don't give many details about the location, so I can't really pinpoint the location. I can just show you a general area of where this might have occurred. Now the Chetco River flows through western Oregon, so I can show you where the river flows through, and from what I gather it was close to Brookings, Oregon, but I'm not too sure about that. They're going to be calling Sasquatch or Bigfoot apes because they didn't know really what they were back then. You know, back in 1890 they already knew about apes. They didn't know about mountain gorillas. People didn't find out about mountain gorillas until the early 1900s. But they knew about other gorillas, and they knew about chimpanzees and orangutans. So the only thing they can compare these things with were apes. So that's why they're going to call them apes, because that's all they knew. So I just want to make sure you guys are clear about that. So before you guys leave me comments, they're not apes, they're not apes. I'm not saying they're apes. I'm just reading the story word for word the way it is, and that's how I do it. I'm not into changing the story or the words in the story just because nowadays we think of things differently. You know, this is how they thought back then, so this is how I read the story. I'm not into embellishing. I'm not into changing history or any of that. Bear in mind with me, when I read the story and they're calling these creatures apes, this was 1890, before, you know, they really knew what these creatures were. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. But now I'm going to show you that location really quick, and after that we are going to get into this story. Alright, so here is the area where this incident occurred, right here on the Chetco River. The Chetco River flows into the Pacific Ocean right here at Brookings. And from everything that I gather, this incident occurred right here close to Brookings, okay? Now the Chetco River flows all the way around and all the way around through there and down in through here into this valley right here. This is where it begins. And then, like I said, it flows all the way around, all the way down into the Pacific. But, like I said, right here is where this incident occurred, in my opinion, because they say something about a steep ravine, and there's a steep ravine right in this area, and I'll show you that right here. As you guys can see, there it is right there, the steep ravine they're talking about. So, most likely, it happened right in here. Right in here, guys, is my best guess. And, you know, usually I like to try to pinpoint it a little better than this, but with this incident occurring in 1890, they don't give a whole bunch of clues on to the location. So you guys are going to have to bear with me on this one. Just going to be able to show you a general area, and that's about it for this video. But the story itself is the main star of this video. Wait till you guys hear what happened to these loggers. Alright, now that I showed you the location, let's go ahead and get into this story. How about it? The logging operation was a small one, employing a dozen men whose family lived in tents alongside the river. For several weeks, nothing unusual happened. Occasionally, garbage cans were overturned at night by marauding bears. Sometimes the beasts were so troublesome that an armed guard stood by while the loggers felled the big trees. At the campsite, mothers watched their young children closely and forbade older boys and girls to play hide-and-seek in the forest. Even when they swam in the shallow river, an adult kept a sharp lookout for bears. Then one morning, enormously large human footprints were discovered along the riverbanks. The loggers laughingly accused one another of having feet as big as chopping blocks. Everyone from the oldest to the youngest in camp measured his footprints against those of the unknown visitor. Since no one's feet were that large, one question was bandied about repeatedly. If those weren't a bear's tracks, then whose were they? Someone said there was a wild man living way up the river. He was an irritable old devil who threatened to shoot anyone who approached his cabin. No matter how bad the weather was, he never wore a hat or boots. He was always bareheaded and barefooted. Barefooted? Then the tracks were his. With the mystery of the tracks happily solved, the people promptly forgot them. But several nights later, the sound of eerie whistling and angry shrieks wakened them. In every tent, men bounded out of bed and grabbed their guns, assuming that there was a wounded bear nearby. No one lighted a lamp for fear of attracting the beast, and frightened children were warned not to cry. The spine-chilling noises went on and on. Sometimes they seemed close by, other times from the direction of the road or the river. But finally the sounds faded into the distance, and quiet returned to the dark campsite. At daybreak, the men gathered to talk. They debated whether it was a bear or mountain lion. To satisfy themselves and ease their families' worries, a half-dozen men searched for bear or mountain lion tracks. They found no mountain lion spoor at all, and no fresh bear tracks. However, at the edge of the clearing, beyond the first stand of trees and dense undergrowth, they came upon more of the giant-sized human footprints. The men debated whether it was the old recluse. They agreed they had to catch the demented man before he killed someone, so as quickly as possible, the search party backtracked along the line of footprints. These led them out to the road several hundred yards above the camp and up the road to the logging site. Here they found where the wild man had emerged from the forest into the open area and had prowled about tree stumps, piles of bushes, and machinery used in loading the logs onto wagons. Then the men had a nasty shock. Massive, unwieldy tree limbs, far too heavy for one man to handle, had been pulled out of the tangled waste piles and either tossed aside like matchsticks or used to beat on the machinery. The searchers followed the tracks back down the road into the forest. For the first time, they noticed shrubs torn to pieces and saplings uprooted and whacked to shreds. This explained the thudding and snapping sounds heard during the night. The footprints circled the camp, went down the well-beaten path to the river, turning back to the road, went down it a half a mile, and turned off into the forest. The men pressed on as far as they dared. However, when the tracks plunged deep into a steep ravine, they stopped. The gloomy depths provided too many hiding places for a demented killer. The Chetco Indians believed there were man-animals in the woods. The logger informed his friends. He had heard the story from a white man whom the Indians trusted enough to take into their confidence. They claimed that for generations they had shared their hunting grounds with fierce-looking hairy creatures that walked upright like men. The strange beings were not human nor animal, neither friendly nor hostile. They were just simply there, like every other man or wild creatures, so the Indians left them alone. But very late on the third night, the frightening sounds were once again heard, faintly from far off in the woods. People jerked up in bed. As the whistling and screaming grew louder, in every tent men pulled on their trousers and boots and readied their guns. Obviously, the night howler was coming closer and closer. When he seemed only 50 feet away, one man took desperate action. Hastily fashioning a torch of oily rags and kindling, he set it to fire. Torch in one hand and rifle in the other, he raced into the woods. Wow. Meantime, the man's wife called for help. Within minutes, several men stumbled towards her in the darkness. They groaned when they learned that their comrade had gone into the woods alone. None hesitated to follow, but minutes passed while one dashed off to fetch a lantern and others supplied themselves with extra cartridges. Finally, the party headed into the forest in the direction from which the awful sounds were heard. They had covered only a short distance when the whistling and shrieking stopped. The men halted and listened. There was a long silence. Then an outburst of bestial yowling, followed by human screams. Thinking their friend was being attacked, the men fought through the undergrowth, the man with the lantern in the lead. Moments later, their comrade appeared and collapsed in their arms. At first, he was too terrified to speak. His companions fired their guns to drive off the howler, then waited patiently for the poor man to gasp out the details. He said that by torchlight he had followed the line of giant-sized footprints and suddenly came upon a huge creature covered with hair. A bear? No, an ape! A monstrous ape, 7 or 8 feet tall, 2 axe handles wide across the shoulders, with beady yellow eyes and bared teeth. The torchlight must have blinded it because it stood stock still, one hand shading its eyes. Then it let out a tremendous roar. The man hurled his torch into its face, but instead of shooting it, the frightened man ran screaming towards camp. While his companions did not doubt his word, they asked anxiously if he was sure the beast was an ape. Yes, he was positive. It really looked like an ape. Yes, an ape. Did it have fangs? You bet. Claws? The man said sarcastically that he hadn't stayed around long enough to study the brute, but after thinking it over, he said it had hands like a man, only twice as large and covered with hair right down to the fingernails. After that, they all decided to return to camp. After much discussion, the loggers agreed to take turns standing guard day and night until the ape was captured or shot. 2 men would patrol the campsite on 2-hour watches while the rest worked or slept. Since women present knew how to handle a gun, their assistance during the daylight hours was welcomed. The older boys and girls offered to gather firewood so that a large fire could be kept blazing all night. Nothing unusual happened during the day or the early night hours, but the 2 whose turn came about 2 a.m. asked the men they were about to relieve to stand by and wait. They wanted to slip into the woods and really search for the ape. Reluctantly, the one patrol agreed to stand by while the relief party set out on their ape hunt. The hunters carried a small lantern because without some light they could not follow any tracks, but they were careful to keep the light at ground level. Their rifles were loaded and the safety catches thumbed back. Not long after, they came upon bits of charred cloth amidst a welter of huge footprints. This must be where their friend had thrown his torch at the monster. Yes, there were his boot marks. After examining the area closely, they found where the ape had turned deeper into the forest instead of backtracking to the road. They followed gingerly, step by step, over and around ferns, shrubs, outcroppings, and rocks and massive tree trunks. What happened next can only be guessed. Apparently, the ape-like creature loomed before them. One man started shooting while the other put down the lantern and shot too. The patrol on guard at the campsite heard the volley of shots. They pounded each other happily. The hunters had killed the beast. But then they listened in mounting horror to frantic cries for help, which were drowned out by the horrendous shrieks and roaring. The awful noises continued for some moments and then faded out. The silence was even more frightening to the guards. They shouted for help and soon were surrounded by armed loggers and their wives. After a hasty explanation, all the men plunged into the woods, leaving the women to build up the fires and protect the children. The searchers shouted, swung lanterns, and fired their guns so that their friends would know help was on the way. After advancing some distance, they stopped briefly and called to the men. When neither responded, they fired shots. No answering shots were heard. Once more the party advanced. Before long, they came upon a gruesome sight. Their friends were dead. Judging from bloodstains, their bodies had been slammed against tree trunks and torn to pieces. A trail of blood-smeared footprints led off into the forest. The beast obviously had been wounded, but no man present was willing to track it through the dark forest. Some did volunteer to gather up the remains of their unfortunate comrades, while others returned to camp for blankets and to break the sad news. Within 24 hours, the campsite was deserted. The logging operation moved to another location. A professional hunter with trained hounds was hired to assist hunters in tracking down the savage beast. It was never captured, nor its voice ever heard again. The most people could hope for was that it had crawled into a well-hidden lair and died. Alright, so there you folks have it. Another crazy story about a Sasquatch and some loggers that come into a conflict, and guess who wins? It seems to me that every time there's conflict between humans and a Sasquatch, the Sasquatch definitely gets the better of the two, you know? It definitely wins that conflict. I mean, imagine that. Imagine being back in 1890. You just have lanterns, you just have old rifles and stuff. No, you know, semi-automatic guns or anything like that. And this beast just tearing people up. Just like going through them, like ripping them to shreds. I would definitely pack up my family and get the hell out of there also. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely would do that. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button for me. Share the video on social media, that helps. Leave me a bunch of comments. And once again, if you're new, hit that subscribe button for me. I'm going to keep on making these videos. I have plenty of videos coming up. And if anybody has their own personal encounters, please, by all means, email me at WILLSTARBigfoot@AOL.com. Leave me as many details as you can, especially like location details. Give me coordinates if you can, and I will do my best to make a video of your encounter. Now, I already have a bunch of emails sent to me, and for you guys that have already sent me your encounters, just be patient. I'm going to be making those videos, but it just, you know, it takes some time. It takes some time to put these videos together. Remember, there's WILLSTAR merchandise out there if you guys are interested. Lots of nice stuff that I have for sale on this website, so if you guys want to check that out, go ahead and check it out. Got hoodies, t-shirts, coffee mugs, hats, a plethora of stuff. And also remember, I have now a Patreon, so if you guys want to become a Patreon member, so I can take some expeditions probably out to the Pacific Northwest and maybe British Columbia, Canada, once, you know, the borders open back up and things like that. I can go on up there and check out those areas from those old classic encounters also, like Ruby Creek and Sasquatch Provincial Park. There's a tons of spots up there that I want to go check out. Maybe even go out onto Vancouver Island and see where the area where Mushalat Harry was. I made that video a couple weeks ago. You guys can check that out too. But that area is still really, really wild, so I'd like to go check out that place also. Alright, that's where we're going to leave it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, always remember, everybody, where there is a WILLSTAR, there is definitely a way. And we will talk to you guys later. Take care.